We're going to continue with the panel. So panelists, as I introduce you, could you please make your way to the stage as we continue? So first is David Crowley, County Executive of Milwaukee County. County Executive Crowley is a lifelong Milwaukee resident. The fundamental tenet of Executive Crowley's administration is to build bridges to bring people together, not walls that keep them apart. Since being sworn into office in May of 2020, County Executive David Crowley led the implementation of the first county-wide strategic plan in 20 years, focusing the county on a vision of achieving racial equity and by doing so becoming the healthiest county in the state. Under his leadership, Milwaukee County has diversified positions at the cabinet department level as well as boards and commissions. In addition, he's also streamlined government to improve access and quality in services for residents. Please welcome County Executive David Crowley. Next is Nancy Hernandez, president of the Hispanic Collaborative. Nancy stepped away from running her marketing firm Abrazo in 2019 to launch the Hispanic Collaborative, a civic initiative housed out of the MMAC, aimed at improving outcomes for Hispanics and moving Milwaukee into a top 10 city on the Hispanic Wellbeing Index. She's built a coalition of over 500 individuals and organizations, making strides in shaping a stronger community and workforce. She is building the infrastructure, processes, and the long-term financial model of her third organization in the region meant to connect and improve the lives of diverse populations. Please welcome Nancy Hernandez. Next is Abby Kursel, partner with Generator. Abby is a partner at Generator, a turnkey platform for creative economy, connecting startups, founders, musicians, artists, investors, universities, and corporations. The Generator platform includes accelerators, corporate programming, conferences, and fellowships. After graduating from UW-Madison, Abby began her career at Generator as the first full-time employee and helped grow it to 130-plus employees, currently serving 40-plus markets across North America and Europe. Abby runs Generator's investment accelerators and leads its team of over 40 individuals across the U.S. and Europe. The investment accelerators have helped 300-plus companies raise nearly $1 billion in capital. Please welcome Abby Kursel. And certainly last but not least is James Phelps, president of JCP Construction. James has more than 21 years of industry experiences, including both field and office experience. He leads the company's construction and business development team and provides senior oversight for the project team to ensure that cost, schedule, and quality commitment are met. A graduate of Marquette University's Acre Commercial Real Estate program, James worked his way through various field engineering and project management roles. James's project experience includes residential and complex commercial structures ranging from $100,000 to $350 million, including the Bader Philanthropies headquarters, Northwestern Mutual Tower and Commons, MSOE soccer and parking facility, and the Milwaukee Bucks Arena. Seeing a market need within the construction industry amid the Great Recession, James started JCP Construction in 2008 with his two brothers, Jalen and Clifton Phelps. Welcome, James. And our discussion moderator is BizTimes editor Andrew Weiland.
Let's get right to it. Thank you to the panel for being here today to talk about the future of Milwaukee County. So panelists, we'll start with the county executive. I'd like each of you to take a look into your crystal ball, and we're talking about Milwaukee County 2050 today. What do you think life in Milwaukee County will be like in 2050?
First and foremost, I just want to say thank you for allowing me to be a part of this panel, and thank you all for actually joining us as well. So, for those who may not know, Milwaukee County in 2019, we were the first jurisdiction in the country to declare racism as a public health crisis. And since that time, we have really doubled down on this idea, and we've seen over 200 local units of government and state governments also adopt racism as a public health crisis. And so for us, when we think about 2050, this is really about how do we make sure that we continue to be a region of choice and making sure that we are investing in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And as Jeffrey was talking about some of those things when we talk about DEI, this isn't a political thing. This is about making sure that no matter your background, no matter your zip code, no matter where you come from, you feel comfortable living, working, and playing in this community. We want to make sure that we're investing in affordable housing because we know it's a crisis right now, and many people can't even afford to live in the communities that they work in. So we want to make sure that we are extremely inclusive, that we're representative of our entire community. And so what we did when I first got elected in 2020, you can imagine how the past 3 years have been with me related to the pandemic and being here. We really focused on our first strategic plan in over 20 years. And we want to make sure that we're investing in intentional inclusion, making sure that we are representative of the community that we represent. We want to invest in bridging the gap, making sure that when folks need assistance, whether it's a business or some personal assistance through social services, that there's no longer a wrong door, but more importantly, making sure that we put our money where our mouth is and investing in equity. But we want to make sure that we have a solid transportation network system. We want to make sure that we're investing in our community because at the end of the day, if we're not, again, looking towards the future, we're going to be behind the curve when it comes down to everything that's happening.
Let's go down the line. Nancy, 2050, what does Milwaukee County look like, do you think?
2050. Well, the first thing I'll say is I have a friend, and one of her favorite quotes is, I have seen the future and it looks Latino. And that is true here in Milwaukee and in Wisconsin as well. If you start looking at some of the numbers, we've all heard about changing demographics. But just to hit you with some of the statistics, if we start talking about net new workers, by 2025, which is only 2 years away, the Bureau of Labor Statistics says 1 out of 2 net new workers is Latino. If you take that between 2020 and 2030, 78% of net new workers are Latino. And those are folks right now that are in our K-12 pipeline. So in regards to 2050, I know we're going to get into more detail of what that changing demographic means. And for us, it's all about intentional strategy, I think. So great to hear the county taking the lead and talking about racism as a public health crisis. Those are the types of intentionalities we need, but I'm an optimist at heart, and so I'm very bully on 2050, and I know with intentional strategies, we're going to really make hay when the sun shines, so.
Abby.
I knew this was going to be the first question, and I felt like my crystal ball was really broken. I had a hard time. But I honestly have no idea what it's going to look like. But I think, the best chances that we have of making sure it's prosperous for everyone is making sure we solve the issues around racism and segregation in this community. I come from the venture capital perspective, and so a lot of what I talk about is investment. We need more investment flowing into this community. We need more of this community's investment staying here, and we need to make sure that that's not just staying in parts of our community. It's going into all corners of it.
How do we make that happen?
You want me to really get into it now?
Sure.
So there's this problem that we see that we like to call the two-pocket problem. So a lot of institutions that are investing, think endowments, foundations, universities, et cetera, they have only 5% of their assets that they hold are required to be distributed to philanthropic purposes on an annual basis. However, the 95% that's left over is there to grow as a pot of money, and rightly so. So what ultimately ends up happening is those institutions typically outsource that 95% to money managers who are typically on the coasts, typically have no ties back to the communities that money is coming from, and ultimately invest it into things that they're exporting this capital to communities to create wealth and jobs in those other communities. Not only that, but oftentimes those investments are actively working against the efforts of the places where the money came from in the first place. So, for example, if there's a foundation who's focused on creating more small businesses in underserved neighborhoods in the community, 5% of their funds, of their assets, might go to that on an annual basis. However, the 95% is being held by fund managers who are investing in funds who might be a large shareholder in Dollar Tree and, creating more and more of those in those communities that are basically obliterating the chances of that small business that foundation supported in the first place to be able to exist and thrive. And so we need to create more of a one-pocket system of how this money is being thought about and distributed, and bring it closer to home, have it be more of a neighborhood community focus, and make sure that these efforts are not contradicting each other but working together for the same purpose.
James, what does Milwaukee County look like in 2050? What do you think? You're helping to build it?
Hopefully. I would say ideally what it is, it's a region that is attractive to all. It's going to be a net gain for, people who live, work here, where the education and the income gaps are all narrowed and where there's a lot of prosperity. However, in order to do that, there's going to be a different way of looking at it, as has been brought up by the other panelists, right? Right now, the incremental approach that we have taken is not going to get us there. It's not enough. The incremental approach is a small rudder on a big ship, to use that analogy. So if we don't change that mindset, what it looks like is a lot different. What it means is that there's going to be areas that we've seen so far that have prospered, and there's going to be certain pockets that have not, where those gaps get bigger. And then what you see is that the area does not become the area of that we would like it to be. So this is the change of mindset that we've had up to this date. So it's up to us how we want this to look, but it's about putting those investments to get that ROI.
I want to talk about education, because I'm going to go right to an audience question here. What role do you see public education or improving it play in Milwaukee 2050 strategic planning? I guess I'll expand on that. We've been debating education issues in this community for a long time. We have a lot of discussion about choice schools, charter schools, public schools, which to support. Are they competing against each other, or are we trying to support all of them? What's the best approach on education? Because education is key to growing our region and making sure prosperity is spread throughout the region. Now, James, we'll just kind of start with you, and we'll kind of bring it back where others can feel to jump in on your thoughts on what needs to be done to really tackle the county's education issues. And you're, as an employer, you're seeing, trying to fill your workforce with the talent that's coming up and the talent pipeline that education is providing. So what needs to be done to improve our education system and bring that talent pipeline as robust as it needs to be?
Well, frankly, we got to do a better job. I'll just say it like that, in that where you have less than 20% of, we'll call it Milwaukee Public Schools, students coming out without, graduating, right, and having an education that allows them to be prepared to either go on to college or be job ready, right? So we see this on a pretty consistent basis with those who do fill out applications without having, proper skills, GED or high school equivalent, or just having basic skills, or whether it's, sometimes even soft skills, right? So what's needed is a good foundation. I think in any kind of municipality is a good public system. Unfortunately, that's not what we have at Milwaukee Public Schools. I'm alum, so I think I can take a little jab at them. Whereas what we need is a better job of making sure that there's accountability there, right? Unfortunately, because that's not the case, is where Choice and Charter has sprouted up to kind of give a competition to give parents and kids the opportunity to be able to have a good education, to be job ready or college ready, right? So we got to do a better job of that, and we got to quit tiptoeing around what really is the issue and kind of get at it. So this goes back to this whole let's be bold, let's be intentional, as opposed to being Milwaukee nice about it.
Go ahead.
I think a real opportunity lies in education in a way we haven't been traditionally thinking about it, which is what Jeffrey was talking about, upskilling. Not only for folks who are trying to change careers, but for folks who, the traditional education system just isn't really their cup of tea. And I think there are a lot, I work in venture capital. There are a lot of really successful people who, don't have the typical, 4 years of high school, 4 years of college, go get your master's or PhD in something. And so we know that it can be done. Obviously, there's, a resource gap that really needs to be filled, but at the same time, there needs to be more opportunities for different types of education for people who want to be skilled in different areas and do different things. So upskilling is really an effort that we've been seeing crop up more and more across many different industries, whether you want to learn to code or whether you want to learn to be a nurse. there are opportunities to do this outside of the classroom as we know it today, and I think that's going to be really important to stay tuned into and expand upon in order to reach, get these resources to everybody in the community who wants them.
So when Amy got up here and asked, which issue breaks your heart as you start looking at some of the statistics, for me, that would be education. If you look at what's happening with our kids, I mean, we're doing them a big disservice right now. We're not putting them in positions that you or I had, which is we're done with high school and we've got a big opportunity in front of us and we have choices. And we have to commit to our kids in the K-12 pipeline to do that. That is our Gen Alpha. And so how prepared we want them to be is dependent on what we do here and what we continue to accept or not accept. This isn't about who's right or wrong. This is just about what kind of outcome do we want and can we build the system to get us to the outcome. So I would suggest that everybody here get involved with whatever side of the fence, whatever school, whatever kids, that there's a lot of programs out there. United Way has some fantastic things, but we need to do something there. And we start talking about AI and digital issues as how much it's going to affect our lives, much less our kids. We don't have our kids right now set up in a way that they're even, have the ability to be digitally literate when they're graduating. And we have some pockets that are, and most pockets that are not. And so think about that coming to you as you're trying to build your business and lean into digital changes and what kind of workforce you're going to have if they're starting from behind the 8 ball. So that's something that is truly an investment. The other thing that I'll say is, we're right, upskilling is a key piece for us. So we've got a big pocket of folks who aren't in the K-12 pipeline who are already as part of our community and are in low-skilled and low-paying jobs. So that's the issue with our Latino community here. It is the fastest growing population, but we have very low median household income and high levels of employment. And so if we think about how COVID helped accelerate a lot of things happening in our community, investing in upskilling helps accelerate regional prosperity for equitable prosperity. And those are two key things that I think everybody in here wants, right? And so we have to think about upskilling as an investment. And this is something that the Hispanic Collaborative is doing. We are currently built a better mousetrap for how do we transition somebody in a $10 to $15 an hour job into a higher paying career today with much better earnings trajectory. And we're doing about 100 folks into IT and healthcare jobs today per year. We're about to scale that with desire to do 1,000. And we don't want to stop there. We'd like to see this moving at 3,000 because we really need to strengthen that pipe. So a lot to say there, and you can tell I'm passionate about education on both sides.
Mm-hmm. I think this is a great question. When we think about education, especially prior to this position, spending 7 years in the Wisconsin State Legislature, I would tell you it's unfortunate how much we have politicized education. The way that we fund education, the fact that we're not even having conversations about how do we prepare children for the future, we're worried about how we're accepting of children in their own classrooms. And so what I would say to a lot of this is that, one, I think that when we talk about education, we must also understand that education doesn't necessarily just happen within the school system solely. For us, when we think about the social determinants of health, you got to think about it. We have young people, we can't introduce them to the freshwater concept who live 3 miles away from Lake Michigan and they've never even seen that lake before. So how do we make sure that we're wrapping around the services, transportation, health, housing, that gives many of our young people as well as their families access to a different level of education that is happening outside of those classrooms? But I would also say that we have to start investing much earlier when it comes down to education. We have to look at early childhood development, early childhood education, and find ways that we can really make those particular investments, because that's how you build a better foundation of learning for every child, no matter what school system that they're going into, public, private, or choice. And so when we think about education, particularly from a county's perspective, we don't have any jurisdiction over any of the public schools or charter schools or choice schools, but we know that we provide many of the services that they need and that we may need to wrap around them to make sure that they're on this road of prosperity and on this road to seeing a better future for themselves. And so we all need to band together and figure out ways that, how do we really transform the way that we look at education? Because many of the policymakers are making decisions based off of their thought of the future versus the thought of our children's futures.
I want to talk about the population of Milwaukee County and population growth, or actually lack thereof. Milwaukee County's population peaked at around 1 million in 1970. Actually, it was above 1 million in 1970. It's less than 940,000 today, so it's declined since then. The mayor of Milwaukee has set a goal for the city's population to be 1 million, but at the highest for the county, it was slightly above that. What must be done to reverse the population decline trend in Milwaukee County? I open this up to whoever wants to jump in, but and this gets down to attracting people to want to live, work, and play, and attracting talent to Milwaukee County. What must be done to reverse the population decline?
Since I'm the politician
Go for
up here. So for us, we need to make sure that we can invest in the quality of life. And so I would tell you that when it comes down to Milwaukee County, our biggest challenge in being able to make the investments that we want to make is the fact that we have some fiscal constraints. And I'm not sure if this is going to be a question later, but with folks...
It will.
Okay. Then what we're looking at is we're looking at a few things. One, how do we strengthen our transportation network? Right? We look at our Milwaukee County transit system. I know everybody thinks it's a city bus. It's not. It's a county bus. But for us, it's like, how do we start to strengthen our transportation system? How do we start to strengthen our healthcare system? How do we really look at how, for us, we can attract individuals to be here? I tell folks all the time, I don't need you to work here, because when you think about the remote era that we're in, you can just live here and still work wherever you want to be. And you think about us, being in the Midwest, we should be able to attract so many people here. You think about the coast, so many folks don't have access to water. Energy grids failing in the South. All the hurricanes, going on both sides of the country. And so when I tell people is that, you can leave those coasts and come to the fresh coast, because this is a place that we want people to come to. But for us, it's really about banding together, working with our private institutions to figure out how do we continue to make this a regional choice. And that's why we focus on DEI. But the other thing that I would say is that we need to, again, focus on other measures. Our homeless population. For those who may not know, Milwaukee County has the lowest unsheltered homeless population per capita in the country. And that's 2 years in a row. And this is one of the things that we can invest in making sure that we can reduce crime all across Milwaukee County, that we can make the proper investments in housing and really push forward. But again, in order to do that, it's going to take businesses working hand in hand with us in the public sector to make that happen, because we have to make sure that we can create partnerships, not just here locally, but with the state government and the federal government as well.
So I'll just add that you have to have a birth rate over 2 in order to increase your population numbers and be growing. And right now, whether we're looking at it regionally or whether we're looking at it across the United States, the only 2 demographics with birth rates over 2 are the Latino community and the Asian community. So whether we're talking about attracting folks from other areas or growing them right here, those are the only 2 populations that have positive growth rates right now. And the question that I would ask, which kind of goes hand in hand with what our county executive says, is, are we building communities that will attract more Latino and more Asian populations? Is this a place that they want to come live and that they believe they can thrive? That's specifically what our goal is at the Hispanic Collaborative, is we want to make this a top 10 city for Latinos, and we track metrics on the 50 top metros, what's happening with their Latino populations in order to make sure that we're doing that and striving for that. We're not doing that just for outcomes here. We're doing that because we know that that will make this community much more attractive to where those growing populations are around the rest of the United States, and think about coming here to Milwaukee to live, work, and play.
Anyone else with ideas, any thoughts?
I agree that it's about the quality of life, right? Because that's what attracts people that I know who are, who weren't born here, but why are they here? They love the balance that's here between it being large enough so it's not a small city, but it still has a small town feel to it, right? So that's something that I think is a great plus for us. But the quality of life, and I guess speaking from a African-American perspective, I remember getting my brother, when he went away to school, getting him back here was a challenge, right? Because you see other opportunities, and you see why have to go deal with certain challenges when you don't have to, say, go to Atlanta or other cities that are a lot more, just a lot more open to what progress looks like. So figuring out what that looks like so that quality of life is inclusive of everyone having those same opportunities. And one thing part of that quality of life also, I think, is this affordable housing, right? Right now, with the cost of housing going up what it is relative to what people are making, it just makes it more challenging to, where are they going, right? At the end of the day, if we were to get 500,000 more people in the city, in the county, there's really not the infrastructure there to put them in place for them to be housed, and if they were, at what cost, at what price point that would be affordable. So that's just something that we got to get our hands around, both here as a county as well as nationally. It just seems to be like something that's going to become more acute as the next 5-10 years.
As far as quality of life, what about public safety? Crime's a longstanding problem in Milwaukee and many other big cities, and it's been particularly pervasive since the pandemic. What do we need to do to tackle the crime issue? Because it seems like if we could get a handle on that, it would be a much more attractive place and would attract a lot more people who would want to live here.
I'll take that one first.
Go for it.
Well, locking them up just by itself isn't doing it, right? If you look per capita, what we're spending right now just on incarceration, it's mind-boggling as far as what that percentage of state budget is. So acutely and strategically, we need to figure out what that looks like for better use of money, because it costs more money, my understanding is, to house someone in the corrections facility than it does to educate them for a year, right? So that's strategically figuring out what that is, but that does mean tactically right now figuring out what that looks like for addressing that. And this goes back to how the money is, what the city and county is able to do with their financial situation. I think if it is local control, which is what the mantra of the government in power is right now, if it's about local control, then it's giving them that local control so that they can invest in safety the way they need to in order to kind of address the issues. But hand tying them at the same time, kind of pointing the fingers a little, it's interesting to watch that little back and forth on that.
Yeah, I appreciate that, James. And I know that's not the question yet. We're gonna get to that. But I mean, for us, it's really about how do we start to make more investments upstream. I mean, as James was talking about, we spend a lot of money on intervention, yet we do not have a budget when it comes down to prevention in the first place. So the more and more that we can start to utilize that data to help tell the story and be able to use it to give it to businesses and make it public facing, we're being able to make better informed decisions on how we actually invest our money. So for example, you're gonna hear me talk about the social determinants of health. And so when you think about Milwaukee County in the entire state, we are 70th of being the healthiest county. 70th, yet we are the largest and the most diverse community in the state, but we have a lot of racial health disparities as well. And so at the end of the day, we need to, one, make sure that we are investing upstream, because we keep watching everybody comes downstream. And the analogy I like to think of is that, one day, you get to imagine being out there fishing and you see somebody in the river and you decide that you're gonna pull that person out. But then you continue to see all these folks, you're gonna start to ask yourself, well, why are these folks coming down the river in the first place? So then you walk upstream and you realize, oh, there's not a barrier, there's not a sign to let folks know that they're gonna fall into the river. We gotta put that barrier up. We gotta put that sign up, and we gotta focus on getting policymakers to think about how we invest upstream. And yes, it costs us money to do that, but we save a lot more money down the line. Prime example, at Milwaukee County, within Milwaukee County, we have a credible messengers program that works with youth offenders, and about 75%, more than 75% of the youth that went through this program have not come back through our doors or are not reoffended. Now, that program costs $3 million, and we're able to reach a lot of young people. But we can lock young people up as well. And so just to have one person locked up within Lincoln Hills costs $430,000 a year. $430,000 a year. That's room and board at any Ivy League school across this country. Okay? So you can just imagine if we just change the way that we think, start to invest upstream, the things that we'll be able to see in our future.
Just to add to that, Andrew, so to juxtapose that number with what we invest in MPS, which is the highest of all of the per pupil investments, we only spend $13,000, less than $13,000 a year to educate our MPS students. So there's a really big difference there. And the only thing I'll add to this whole safety issue is, you know, I think as a community, we have to start asking ourselves, who's really has the insight and the ability to change the dynamic that's happening in our communities? Is it our civic institutions? I mean, is it our GMCs, our MMACs of the world? And I'm not saying that they shouldn't be at the table and shouldn't be invested. They should, but we need to do a lot more listening to what the communities want and how they see the solutions and handing over the resources to them in order to get the job done. That's what really is going to make lasting change.
Getting back to the issue of growing the community and our population and our prosperity, Abby, I want to bring you in on this. You know, Generator has offices in more than 30 locations across North America. So, I mean, you guys see different cities and what they're doing. What are you seeing that's really working when you have places that are really prosperous, thriving economies, thriving communities that are growing? What are some of the things that you guys have noticed that are happening in these places that we can use here and that the business community and the private sector can really get engaged in?
Yeah, so I think one really great example of the business community and the private sector coming together for the purpose of prosperity in a community is what's happening in Indianapolis. There's a group called the CICP, the Central Indiana Corporate Partnership, and basically, I think it was in like '99 or something, a bunch of different corporate and university executives came together and said, hey, we recognize that, you know, there's more we could be doing in the community to help really bolster our economy here. And they did a big study and came out with a handful of different sectors that they essentially created these individual entities around. So they said, you know, we really should be focusing on technology, we should really be focusing on energy, transportation, advanced manufacturing and logistics, workforce development, and they essentially created an organization that has a CEO and a staff of 6 to 7 people per each of these categories that does a lot of public policy and programming to attract, retain businesses within those sectors, help with workforce development, and it's all with the buy-in. The entire board is all of the CEOs and executives at and leadership at these universities and corporations in town. Again, it's been going since '99 now, and it's just an incredibly robust effort that the state is bought into, the city is bought into, all of the local stakeholders are bought into, and you really see the impact of what that has had on those sectors within that community.
Something that's been brought up several times is how to improve equity in the community, economic prosperity throughout the community. Milwaukee has longstanding issues with racism and segregation. What do you think the business community can do to improve this? And, you know, the MMAC has their big Region of Choice program. You know, is that working? You know, what should our business community be doing to bring more prosperity, improve hiring and promoting throughout diverse communities in Milwaukee County?
I can start. I think it's those are steps in the right direction, right? I mean, the MMAC with Region of Choice, here are the Higher Education Regional Alliance and their 3 goals of closing disparity. I mean, there's the CDA and what that is doing in affordable housing. There's a lot of great steps in the right direction, and what I'll reiterate is that, you know, between the last, if we look at the last recession and recovery from the last recession, disparities grew between races, not just here in Milwaukee, but all over the United States. And so as we think about what we want to happen between now and 2050, it will take an intentional strategy, right? We're sitting here talking about upskilling. The fact of the matter is that what you have out there in upskilling world is primarily right now geared for white-collar workers. Okay, let's take a look at our black and brown populations here. Only 13% of them have a college degree, juxtaposed with our white community has 33%. We're not, no matter how well I do my job in making this a top 10 city for Latinos, you will not be able to import all that talent. And so think about what does that mean for you as a business community, and how can we make some real investments in higher education, because you don't want those numbers to start rolling back. So how do we shoot for 50% of our overall population, and then what do those strategies look like separately in each of our communities? Those are the types of deep dives that we need to be doing, not just as a singular entity or us in partnership with the MMAC, because we're housed there intentionally, but we need to start broadening the stakeholders that we have at the table, bring in government, bring in more on the private side as we're talking about, and have intentional strategies behind what does our workforce look like, and what do these homes look like, and how are we shifting that? Because economics solves a lot of problems. And so that to me is a key focus for us, of having intentional strategies behind those.
Yeah, I think, you know, one of my favorite things to say is that we've seen generations of disinvestments in many different communities, including Milwaukee and across this country. But we must also recognize that those generations of disinvestments may take a generation of investments in order to change what we have been through and what we're currently seeing. And so really, it's really about that public-private partnership and truly putting your money where your mouth is. I think that right now, many people are talking about, you know, DEI, DNI, but are we really putting our money where our mouth is and really making those investments? It's great to be able to have these partnerships, but are we really investing in the same communities that are literally a half mile away from many of the businesses that our places are currently housed in? You know, I grew up in the 53206 zip code, and you know, 2 miles away is River Hills, right? Just think about that. Like, we have some of the, you know, the most wealthiest people, you know, not too far from some of the most poorest people. And so when we talk about making the investments and understanding that Milwaukee County is still one of the most segregated communities in the country, we really have to put our money where our mouth is. And really that's going to come through the form of affordable housing. That's going to come through the form of strengthening our Milwaukee County transit system. But the other thing is going to come in the form of is making sure that we are providing access to mental health treatment. With the amount of drug addiction and the amount of mental health crises that we're seeing in our community and across this country is profound. So we have to make sure that, we are looking at the data and making sure that we're utilizing that data to make smart investments.
I'm thinking about like what other communities have done, right, to kind of make to lessen that gap between the have and have-nots. And one thing that comes to mind is they were very intentional down in Atlanta when they expanded, you know, with infrastructure, when they expanded the airport down there, right? Very intentional, very aspirational goals for making sure that there was inclusion by all in the project, right? You fast forward, and I think there's many studies to prove out that was very, that went a long way towards solidifying and growing the middle class down there, and specifically people of color and, you know, in the business class down there. And the rest is history, right? It became a magnet where everyone else wanted to go to. Just from what the presenter said today about what we have here and the opportunity here in Milwaukee for infrastructure that's needed for the next 25 plus years. Some of it is going to be, you know, bricks and mortar, but a lot of this is also going to be technology as well. So looking at what that could look like to make sure that there is this aspirational inclusion for whatever this new infrastructure is, both technology-based as well as bricks and mortar to make sure that there is opportunity for not having the small rudder expecting, it to change course, but putting a bigger rudder on the ship so that there's, and thinking bigger than what we have done in the past.
Affordable housing has been mentioned a few times by this panel. We have a question from the audience asking about how to address affordable housing. And James, I want you to start on this. On the construction side, give us an idea of, obviously there's costs that run into providing housing and building it. What do you see, and others can jump in then after James, but how do we tackle the affordable housing challenges in Milwaukee County as you see it?
By getting rid of this not my backyard mentality that we have. Let's just cut to the chase here, right? It's okay if it's in the city of Milwaukee, but as soon as it starts jumping into whether it's, one of the first ring suburbs, then the next thing you know, yeah, we need it. You find out it's like 2 blocks down, and the next thing you know, you're at the next BOZA meeting or whatever it is, protesting it, right? It's needed by all. So yes, we need it, but over there is what's this ping pong effect, which I think is why we don't have a lot of traction countywide with affordable housing.
No one wants it in their backyard, or is that a density issue, or is it both?
Let's just keep it real. This is not a density issue. This comes down to not wanting the perceived people who would be using those, and people always look at affordable housing as, oh, it's going to be the low-income people, but not knowing it's the same people who are, the wait staff and whatnot else. So there's a perceived issue of who will be using housing, which there is a portion of that, but it also is just people who are, in the service industries as well. But the thing is, same with busing, right, and transportation. It's great, but not over here, because now what that means is that a different class of people will be able to access the services and the communities that they have deemed, this goes back to the whole redlining and segregation, right? So it all is together. So we can't sit here and talk about what we need to do, but it's like, yeah, but you guys do it over here, but not over here. So it's being open and honest and having dialogue as opposed to being Milwaukee nice about it.
And as a construction guy, what he didn't say is that building affordable housing isn't affordable either, because, the housing, the cost to build a home right now is skyrocketed as well. But what I can tell you is that Milwaukee County, through our ARPA funds, we have invested more money in housing since the 1930s, particularly in suburban areas. So we've been able to work with South Milwaukee, we've been able to work with Wauwatosa and Brown Deer to actually build affordable housing in those communities. And James is right. There are other places around Milwaukee County, and some places are looking at ways that they can build. Many communities within Milwaukee County are extremely built out. So finding the infrastructure in some communities, a place that comes to mind is like Shorewood. Where would you build that, right? So you will have to find some existing infrastructure in those communities, and that can be difficult. But we do have to have this conversation of the perception of affordable housing. We have been talking about affordable housing for many years, and all of a sudden, they changed up the language and say, well, we need workforce housing. Well, what's the difference? There isn't one, right? But the thing is that perception of who is in affordable housing is the same people who is in workforce housing. And so if you've never read the book, The Color of Law, I would highly recommend that you go read that book, because he talks about what affordable housing was and what it was created to be. Many people may not know that to have affordable housing back in the day when it first started, you had to have a job. You had to have a job in order to be in affordable housing. And then you use it as your stepping stone to go out and buy your single-family home. But we have to also make sure that we have partnerships. There's no way the county or any local municipality within the state of Wisconsin can build affordable housing. You need the federal partnerships, and we have been able to lean on folks like Senator Tammy Baldwin, who brought back $5 million, and right now we are looking at a particular project in a suburban community, and it may be the largest affordable housing project since the 1930s. And so we have to continue to make these investments, but we also need to understand that we need more people to the table, because affordable housing is costly, and if we want to make sure that the individuals living in those homes can afford to be in those homes, we have to figure out what kind of lasagna stack we're going to put together to make sure that we can get it done.
I want to circle back to what Abby had talked about earlier that was going on in Indianapolis. I wanted to ask you if you think those are things that we can apply, or how can we apply them in Milwaukee?
Yeah, I think the Milwaukee Tech Hub is a good example of those groups starting to come together for the first time. That's, a lot around like tech workforce and whatnot. I think it's hard for me to say, but I think it's really just kind of, I'll just say it. I think there are a lot of silos in the city, especially at the corporate level.
Say it like it is. Say it like it is.
And so, like, honestly, I don't know how to break through that. But I think the more that we can facilitate rooms where leaders in those organizations can come together and have conversations around efforts like that is really important. I don't know how to get them all there.
I wonder, to your point, I agree 100%. And, let's just take even workforce development, right? There's a lot of different people doing great work in workforce development. But the challenge is that they're all in these silos, right? I'm sure it's the same in your industry. And they're not necessarily talking, collaborating, and figuring out best practices or leveraging resources. What needs to happen is those silos turn on its side so that they're pipelines. And that's what's not happening. And I'm sure it's real similar where you have all this great information, but they're kind of protecting it. But I wonder if the funding sources were rewarding it versus it almost being protective of their funding sources so that there's lack of collaboration, but somehow figuring out a way to reward it.
I promised a question about the fiscal challenges Milwaukee County is facing. I don't really want to get into it specifically because that problem has been discussed and it's out there. So I want to kind of bring it into the picture of, getting folks outside of the county to recognize the challenge and how to get collaboration with others outside the county to tackle the problem. Specifically, yes, I'm looking at state government. I'm also looking at, the rest of southeastern Wisconsin, because as Milwaukee County goes, so will this region go, so will the whole state go. So instead, getting beyond the us versus them that so often occurs, Milwaukee versus perhaps the rest of the region or the rest of the state, how do we begin, and this would be like a closing question, getting more cooperation between this community, state government, the rest of the region, to tackle the fiscal and other problems that are important here but matter to everyone in Milwaukee County and beyond?
Absolutely. And to answer that question, first and foremost, there is no us versus them. It's only us as a state. And, when you think about Milwaukee County, we support many different businesses all across Milwaukee County. So I remember while we knew that we needed to hit a reset button and figure out how do we change or improve the relationship that we have, not with just, the folks who represent different communities in Madison, but with these many different communities, 72 counties all across the state. And so I would go to Chippewa Falls, and people was like, well, why are you in Chippewa Falls? Well, anybody and everybody would love to go to Leinenkugel, right, and do a tap okay? But when you think about it, we also have Morrison Coors right here in our own backyard. If we're not able to make the investments to keep companies like that, how does that affect a Leinenkugel, right? When you think about the Harley Davidsons of the world who may contract and work with other businesses, manufacturers all across the state, if they were to leave, how does that in turn affect them? No matter where you are, I think everybody can understand is that if you drop a dime in Milwaukee County, it makes a ripple effect across the entire state. And so our job is to show that we're not doing this alone. And yes, we can beat our chest and say we're the economic engine, but we're not the only part. We're not the only thing. We're not the only thing keeping that engine going. And so we have to recognize that we do this in partnership with all of the different local municipalities within our region, as well as across the state. So it's extremely important that we continue to talk about how collaborative we need to be and how we do this in partnership, because this is about the prosperity, not just for Milwaukee County and our region, but for their entire state. And just like you started with the question, the better we do, the better the entire state does.
Anyone else want to touch on it?
I'll say that collaboration requires resources to do it. And so we have to think about that in the equation. Our organizations, whether they're on the public or private side, this just can't be a side thing or a check the box. If you want real collaboration, then these organizations have to have the capacity and the mindset to do that. And That's not something, it started a little bit during the pandemic, I think, but it's something that we really need to get serious about and invest in.
I think there's just this factor of like, you gotta go there, you gotta invite them here too. I think in my industry at least, I can't tell you how many examples there are of people just saying like, oh, they don't collaborate with us, they don't collaborate with us. And it's like, well, did you ever ask them? Usually the answer is no. And I can't tell you how many times I've introduced like counterparts to one another between Milwaukee and Madison, and they had no idea each other existed. We're not big enough to be able to go it alone, and so we have to look outside the walls of our own community to gather those resources and make those connections. But it starts with a phone call or an email or a visit and actually reaching out to make that invitation.
Only thing I would like to say is I would like to applaud both the county exec and the mayor for resetting that button on that, on that collaboration effort there. I think for a while it was kind of stalled. It was great to see them as, collaborate together, then go and have those conversations to kind of reset that. It was needed, and so thank you for your leadership along with the mayors on
I
that.
can say we're almost there.
Well, with that, we're out of time, so I just want to thank James, Abby, Nancy, David. Appreciate you being part of our discussion today.